Hello again everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the Aeroplane Heaven P-47D Razorback. The P-47D released recently for the sim, and whilst Aeroplane Heaven do have a somewhat checkered past with their Microsoft Flight Simulator releases, those of you familiar with the channel will know that I'm never one to pass up the opportunity to take a look at another warbird. So I was pretty keen to get stuck into this one, and I've certainly pulled out all the stops for our flight here today. It is late June 1944. Our aircraft is currently situated on Advanced Landing Ground Bravo 9er, located just outside of the town of Lantheuil. Top secret intelligence suggests that as the Allies move inland off the northern coast of France, the Axis powers are going to be moving a couple of high-ranking military officers off the island of Jersey and back home towards Berlin. We're expecting the first leg of that trip to be flown with a Junkers Ju52. Our task today is to patrol out over the English Channel, and if possible locate and shoot down the German transport. As you'll have seen from the introduction, just for a little bit of fun, I've tried my best to recreate some memories from Microsoft's Combat Flight Simulator. As much as I would love to see a return of the franchise, this is as close as we're going to get for the time being, so I do hope you enjoy it for what it is. In terms of our flight and review, once again we're currently on the ground at Lantheuil. We're going to be departing off the airfield. As usual, we'll run through a full startup, we'll make our way out over the channel, we're going to intercept the Ju52. We'll then make a return, come back for a low-level pass, and finally a landing back onto the airfield. As usual, putting the aircraft through its paces as we go, and we'll finish up the video with my overall thoughts and conclusions. As always, I really hope you enjoy the flight. If you do, please consider giving the video a like and subscribing to the channel. And if you would like to help support my efforts further, you can do so by becoming a channel member or patron. So this morning then we find ourselves in the cockpit of the Aeroplane Heaven P-47D Razorback. As per usual, Aeroplane Heaven have done an absolutely exemplary job with the visuals of the aircraft. As you can see, a very high level of attention to detail on the modelling, excellent texturing, and really nice weathering as well, which I always feel helps to bring an aircraft to life. There are though some scrappy details. For example, you can see here that the vertical speed indicator reading incorrectly with the aircraft not powered. That shouldn't be an electrical instrument. I believe that was the case as well with their Spitfire, so I'm not quite sure why that issue's been carried over. Similarly, for example, we can actually actuate the intercoolers here without any power to the aircraft. I could be wrong on that, but I would imagine that's incorrect. Anyway, as discussed during the introduction, we're currently on the ground at Lantheuil. We're going to be taking the aircraft out over the English Channel to go and intercept our Axis aircraft outbound from Jersey. I would imagine in reality this would be somewhat of a scramble situation, but as usual we're going to run through a full startup here just to give you some idea as to the level of systems depth. And we're actually going to be using a DCS checklist here during the video, so if you do notice any discrepancies between what we're doing here and the manual, that will explain why. Anyway, for the before start checks, the brakes are checked and set. Fuel selector, come through to the main tank. And no sounds associated there with the fuel selector, which is always a little bit disappointing on an add-on not to have a complete sound set these days. Particularly on an add-on at this sort of price point. For me, that sort of detail just really kills the immersion straight off the bat. Anyway, fuel selector is set through to main. Boost lever is off. Mixture lever's in the idle cutoff position. Prop lever set through to max. CBs are checked in, they're not modelled on the aircraft. Fuel booster rear stat is set through to start. Generator is selected on. For the primer, it's a fairly warm morning outside, so we'll go for 2 pumps here on the primer initially. Again, no sounds associated with that. And the primer is locked. Battery master is selected on. Oil cooler and intercooler flaps can go through to neutral. And once more, no sounds associated with those, which is just a real shame. The P-47 is actually a really nice add-on overall. And a complete sound set would certainly go a long way just to making it all that much better. So both of those set through to neutral. Ignition is set through to both. Throttle will crack 1 inch. Checking the prop area. All clear on the left.
Clear prop.
And clear on the right. The starter will come through to energize. In reality, we want to hold that down for 15 to 20 seconds. Aeroplane Heaven have cut that back to 10 seconds, but the engine won't start if you don't wait 10 seconds, which is a nice little detail. Anyway, there's our 10 seconds, so we'll come through to engage. And as the prop turns there, bring the mixture in. Good start, we'll come through to auto rich. I believe this just actuates as a normal mixture lever, there's certainly no detents. And just nudging the throttle up, letting the engine tick over at 900 RPM. Come fully back on the stick here as well. Oil pressure is checked, that's up above 25 psi. Vacuum pressure is checked. Nav lights are selected on. The before taxi checks, the flaps are currently up. We'll just check the operation of those as well. The flap lever is interesting. It does work correctly if you actuate it via the cockpit click spots. So you can see here, for example, that the lever is animated. You hold it down to put the flaps into the position you want, and then return it back to neutral. Unfortunately though, if you use your hardware key bindings, the lever there is not animated. Anyway, as I say, we'll just check for correct flap operation. Overall as well, the engine sounds on the aircraft I think are generally quite nice, maybe just a touch flat, but certainly one of Aeroplane Heaven's better engine sound sets to date. Okay, so there's full deployment of the flaps. We'll bring those back into the up position. Altimeter is set, we've got 160 feet on the aerodrome elevation. Canopy is open. Tail wheel is unlocked. Cowl flaps are open. We'll take the landing light on here for the taxi. And we'll take some cockpit lighting on here as well. So we'll just let things tick over, let the engine continue to warm up, although there's not all that much modelling in terms of temperatures and pressures. Generally though, the temperatures and pressures do sit at quite a nice range, so things don't feel too unrealistic. Anyway, as I say, we'll let things tick over, let our wing get started up here as well, and then we'll head out towards the southwesterly runway for the takeoff. Okay, so we're now on the southwesterly runway here at Lantheuil. We've got our number 2 there off the right hand wing. For the before takeoff checks, the attitude indicator has been uncaged, the trims are set through to neutral. Interestingly, as you can see, the rudder trim is animated and does seem to affect the aircraft's flight model. The aileron trim on the other hand is neither animated nor does it seem to have any effect on aircraft performance, which once again is a detail you would have expected to have seen cleaned up ahead of release. The flight controls, we have full left and full right here on the ailerons, full up and full down on the elevator, full left and full right there on the rudder, and the flight controls are full free and in the correct sense. We can lock up the tail wheel. It is worth noting directional control on the P-47D much improved over the Aeroplane Heaven P-51. The aircraft actually tracks pretty nicely, as hopefully I'll be able to demonstrate in just a moment's time. We'll close up the canopy. You'll notice there's little to no change in sound with the canopy closed, which once more is a detail we typically tend to see on add-ons these days. We are somewhat limited in terms of our takeoff run here out of Lantheuil, particularly at our current weight, so we're going to take 50% here on the flaps ahead of the takeoff. And as before, my hardware they're not animating the flap lever, but I suspect that's a sim limitation due to the way that the flaps actuate on the P-47. So check there on the left, same on the right, looking good. Take the park brake off, just holding the aircraft on the toe brakes. One last point to note here ahead of the takeoff. As far as the blower or the supercharger is concerned, I gather in reality we want to bring the throttle up ahead of the blower, and I believe as well there should be some sort of interconnect between the two, which doesn't seem to be modelled on the aircraft, again presumably due to a sim limitation. We are however going to need the blower here for takeoff to get 52 inches on manifold pressure, and of course it's going to be pretty hard to actuate both of those at the same time during the takeoff run. So somewhat unrealistically we're just going to come all the way through and then just shy of max blower throughout the flight. You'll notice here as well that has the turbine overspeed light flashing. According to the manual that's actually correct, somewhat counterintuitively that is what we want to be seeing.
You're clear for takeoff.
So all set, again just holding the aircraft on the brakes through to 30 inches initially on the manifold pressure. And temperatures and pressures looking good off the brakes, all the way through now to 52 inches. Just dabbing the right hand brake initially to keep the aircraft straight until we've got some airflow going over the rudder. There's 51 inches, 2700 RPM. And again, T's and P's look good. Nose just wanting to swing out to the left, so correcting that with rudder, needing almost full rudder input there, but overall the aircraft is very controllable. Tail wheel coming up, about 300 miles an hour, so we'll just start to ease back on the stick. And again, getting airborne just ahead of the departure into the runway. Looks like someone else there wasn't quite so lucky. Anyway, we do have a positive climb, tap the brakes, bring up the gear, and we'll just hold 52 inches here until we're up through 500 foot above aerodrome elevation, so 700 feet. So needing quite a bit of right rudder here to keep the aircraft balanced, which is nice to see. We are up at max check currently. There's 700 feet. We'll come back now to 42 inches. Just maintaining the same rudder input. And you'll notice there the ball just starting to nudge out towards the left. So changes in engine power setting do have an effect on the flight model, which is great to see. And overall, I think the flight model is one of the strengths of the product. There's no major vices that I've found so far with the P-47. So we'll just ease off a little bit on that rudder input, balance up the aircraft once again. And we now have 42 inches, 2500 RPM, 150 miles an hour. That's our target climb speed, so we'll pitch for that, trim out as well. And we can start retracting the flaps. And of course the aircraft just wanting to sink a little bit here as well as we do so. So for the after takeoff checks, the gear is up, lights out, flaps are up, trims are set as required. We'll take the nav lights and the landing light off. We'll leave the cow flaps open here in the climb, and we'll switch over to the drop tanks in just a moment. We want a heading of 243 outbound towards the first waypoint. That's the town of Saint-Lô. And we've got 22 miles to run there. We're doing about 180 miles an hour currently. It's about 3 miles a minute. It's going to be about 7 minutes, give or take, towards the first waypoint. That's going to be a time of 1:05. Good now on the heading, up through 3,000 feet. And our number 2 there, nicely holding station just off the right wing. So lights are off, we'll take the gun sight on. Nice to see that's been animated, although it's done in a fairly basic fashion, basically just painted onto the reflector there. A little bit of a shame, obviously gun sights can be modelled quite accurately in the sim these days, and again on an aircraft of this sort of price point you would have expected that sort of detail. Just coming up through 4,000 feet, we're going to climb as high as we can get here, just below the cloud layer. Obviously, ideally, we'd want to gain as much altitude as we possibly can in case we encounter any 109s or F-190s en route, but we need to stay below the cloud base here today just to allow us to spot the Ju52. He's going to be flying fairly low altitude, I would imagine, outbound of Jersey. Looks like we are going to be able to get up through 10,000 feet though, so we'll take the oxygen on. Again, you can see the system has been modelled. And lastly then we'll switch over to the external drop tanks. We'll start burning those down. So onto the left hand drop tank for the time being, just up through 5,000 feet. A very nice detailing on the aircraft overall. You can see there the cowl flaps just being buffeted around slightly there in the airflow. For me, the P-47 really does represent some of Aeroplane Heaven's best work in the sim to date. Again, I rather like the flight model overall. There are some nice little details here and there. As usual though, just a few scrappy mistakes which just hold the aircraft back a little bit. Certain things that you really would have expected to have been seen cleared up ahead of release. Anyway, continuing on the climb for now, got about another 4 minutes outbound towards Saint-Lô. After that we'll be turning on to a heading of 254, that's going to be a 14-mile leg over to the town of Coutances. And then on another 20 miles out over the English Channel towards our expected intercept point for the Ju52.
701, got wind speed of the climb of 5101 control, about a 0 left at 10 o'clock for 20 miles, wind speed going to contact Coastal 990. And on 601, copy with the left-hand turn, expect to rejoin 2990 or 2000, your third rejoin. Looking to get less than that 15,000 foot-pounds to AR, that's what we're managing the tanks.
Okay, so we're just off the western coast of France currently. We've got Jersey out off the left wing. And once again, our wingman just holding station. We'll get the P-47 here cleaned up ahead of any engagement, so back onto the main tank. We can ditch both the drop tanks. And as you can see, that is animated. We can clean the aircraft up, which is a nice touch.
Radar reports bandits in your sector.
Intel has the Ju52 down at 3,000 feet. We're currently at 3.5. So we should see the target somewhere down below us.
Bandits in sight. I've got him. Copy. 7 o'clock low.
There he is, just off our 7 o'clock. So we'll come back round. Come back up on the RPM. And indeed the throttle. And again, the P-47 behaving pretty nicely overall here as we crank the aircraft around. Just keep an eye there on our T's and P's as well. 42 inches on the manifold pressure should do us for now. So just using the water rudder keybind here for the guns. Unfortunately the guns are a toggle as opposed to simply pressing the switch, which is a little bit suboptimal. The animation as well, not the best I've seen in the sim, no tracer effects for example. Still a nice feature to have overall.
Commencing attack. Tally-ho.
They're making our first run. The guns are also a little bit muted in terms of sound.
Good shooting.
We'll come back round for another run. Just cranking on some G here as we do. Try not to lose visual with the target. It's always pretty tricky to spot things visually in the sim at the best of times, especially with the fairly short draw distance of objects in Microsoft Flight Simulator, which does seem to have gotten worse over the years as well.
Disengaging.
So back in for another run, just keeping an eye there on our wingman. And lining the target up nicely. As I say, it would be nice to have some tracer effect. I'm pretty sure I've seen other aircraft in the sim which do. And looks like we've probably got him there. He's up into a bit of a stall, banking over. We'll make one last run if we can.
There he goes.
Our wingman just clearing out of the way. He's heading straight and firmly down towards the deck. Shouldn't really trace it down in real life, but nevertheless, of course we want to see the hit.
That's a confirmed kill.
And looks like we got him.
Mission completed. Return to base.
So we'll come back towards 42 inches. Just back off towards 2500 RPM. Just until we build up that speed again. We'll get the aircraft fairly low level here. We'll make a low level run back down the coast. Keep below any enemy radar. And head back home towards Lantheuil. Okay, so we're approaching Lantheuil. Low level inbound towards the base. We've got the base there off at 11 o'clock. You might just about be able to make that out. We'll enter in for somewhat of a left-hand pattern. We're going to make a low-level fly past initially at the runway. We'll go beat up the field, check out the external sounds of the P-47 in the fly past. Just before we do that, we can fence out, so we'll take the gun side off, the nav lights, and the landing lights and go on once again. And we'll get our downwind checks done, so brakes are checked and off, undercarriage will hold. Mixture set through to auto rich, fuel pump not required, fuel state. Running off the aux tank for now, we're down to about 75 gallons there on the aux, and about 150 there in the main. Landing lights are on, flight instruments are checked, harnesses secure. There's the runway, so turning in.
Welcome home, you're cleared to land.
Again, we'll come in on a left-hand downwind initially. And as I say, we'll make a low-level, high-speed pass down the runway, check out the fly past, see how the aircraft sounds. And then we can break off for another left-hand pattern back to land. The wind is still up from the southwest, so landing on the southwesterly runway. And we'll try not to achieve the same here as the Typhoon or the Tempest there off at the departure end of the runway. Again, overall the landing and approach characteristics of the P-47 much improved over the Aeroplane Heaven P-51D. The aircraft relatively much easier to land, still a little bit of a handful though, and you've got to be careful not to get too slow. We'll come back up to 2500 RPM. And 42 inches. And we'll roll in for our pass. I've got to say, I've really been enjoying flying the aircraft. It does feel like a little bit of a diamond in the rough within the sim. There's certainly a lot of potential there for it to be a great aircraft. As usual, at the end of the video we can discuss a little bit more about what I like, what I don't like about the product in its current state. So nicely lined up here with the runway. Getting yourself straightened out. A nice low level run for everyone down there on the ground. And braking off back towards the left in for a left hand pattern. Coming in for landing. Okay, so just continuing the left-hand brake, we'll cut the power back towards 32 inches again. And back towards 2300 RPM. Bring ourselves nicely onto a downwind, we'll chop the power now, get that speed back. You can take the gear down, I believe, at 200 miles an hour. Flaps can come down at around 190, which is rather high. But again, true to life of the P-47. So all the way back on the power, starting to trim out for the reduction in speed. And it's not in the checklist, but we'll just crack the canopy here for the sake of interest, here for the landing. There are some nice options here. We can either manually adjust the canopy, or you can have it open all the way, close all the way by the various click spots. The animations though for the full movement are rather abrupt. It's only the top animation here that's nice and smooth. So all the way back off the power, we'll start rolling in. There's 200 miles an hour, we'll take the gear down. As you can see, haven't adjusted the intercooler or the all cooler shutters throughout the flight. Really not necessary, there's not that level of depth to the modelling. Be great if there was, but that's not a criticism of the product. I don't necessarily expect that from Aeroplane Heaven. So we'll keep the speed at around 150 miles an hour for now. Runway in sight, nice and clear on the right wing. Come all the way through to full flap. And as a result we'll get a nice amount of drag there off those big barn door flaps off the P-47. Okay, so speed's good. We want around 120 here down final approach. We don't want to get any slower than 100. The checklist calls for the tail wheel to be locked, so we'll leave it in the locked position. I find personally landing with it unlocked is often a little bit easier, just to save you fiddling around on the runway once you want to turn off. With the fuel selector, we'll come back onto the main once again. And for our final checks, pitch is full fine, undercarriage down, we have a green light, flaps are set. Landing clearance we have, the runway is clear. And as you can imagine, forward visibility in the P-47, pretty so-so, a little bit better than certain other warbirds, certainly better than the likes of the Corsair. Nevertheless, a curved approach or a slightly steeper approach as we're flying here tends to help with the visibility. Just getting a little bit fast here, so cutting the throttle for now. And again, trimming for the speed. Slowly edging back towards a decent profile. And back onto our target speed. One nice feature about the runway here is it's nice and wide, so we can actually keep ourselves aligned with the runway without having to fly that curved approach or side-slipping the aircraft. That does make things a little bit easier. So over the threshold, dropping the power, and the P-47 always a little bit higher than I first think, so flaring probably a little bit too early there, but nevertheless at a reasonable height, just lowering the aircraft onto the runway. A little bit of a bounce overall, pretty happy with that landing. And again, the tail wheel currently locked, so just using a little bit of braking and a little bit of rudder to keep the aircraft straight. Okay, so just vacating off to the right of the runway, we've now got the tail wheel unlocked. And ground handling in the P-47, pretty straightforward. We've got tail wheel steering on the flight model. So we'll just taxi into position, we'll get the aircraft shut down. We'll try and turn around here in the bay, just to test out the aircraft's turning radius. Obviously though, taking things nice and slow. Just get the canopy opened up here as well. As you can see, the animation there is pretty instantaneous using the click spot on the canopy itself. So as you can see, you can get a pretty tight turn radius here out of the P-47. Very gently onto the brakes, full back stick here as well. Park brake can go on. We'll just leave the engine here idling around 1100 RPM. So for the shutdown checks, the brakes are set. We'll take the landing lights off. Flaps can come up. Just wait for those to run in. Gun camera and sight are selected off. Engine idling 1000 RPM. We'll open up the cowl flaps. Oil temperature is checked, mixture can come through to idle cutoff. Rather abrupt change in sounds there as the engine cuts, same during the startup. Again, it would be nice to have more of a blend to those different sounds. Overall, the shutdown sounds themselves are pretty nice. Again, just various improvements to the sound set would really benefit the aircraft, I personally feel. Anyway, we do have a good cut. We'll take the ignition off. Fuel selector is off. Oxygen is selected off. Interestingly, we ran through our entire oxygen supply there during the flight. Don't know whether that's having it perhaps in an emergency setting, but it depleted pretty quickly. Heat is selected off. Generator is off. Battery master is off, and that is the shutdown checklist complete. So there you go guys, I do hope you enjoyed our outing in the Aeroplane Heaven P-47D, and as well our little World War II reenactment within the sim. As you've hopefully seen, you can get somewhat of a plausible World War II experience out of the sim, but to be frank, it does take quite a bit of work. It is quite a laborious process. Anyway, the main aim of the video here today is to analyse the Aeroplane Heaven P-47. With that in mind then, we'll just touch on a few categories regarding the aircraft. I'll give you what I think are the strengths and weaknesses of the product. Starting with the modelling of the aircraft, I think both externally and internally the Razorback looks great. A very high level of attention to detail in terms of the modelling throughout the aircraft. I'm not much of a rivet counter, and certainly for me the visual model was more than acceptable. I have seen though online a few issues here and there with slight inaccuracies in terms of the modelling. I don't know exactly how accurate those comments are, but hopefully you can judge for yourselves via the video. Again, very few things I can complain about with the texturing, particularly internally. I think the aircraft looks great, a really nice level of wear and tear throughout. One minor niggle with the external texturing. I do find that with the polished metal liveries included with the aircraft, the PBR effects there for the polished aluminium does tend to be a little bit dark, and therefore things don't look quite right to me. Otherwise though, again, a very visually strong model with the P-47, which is no major surprise, that's always one of Aeroplane Heaven's fortes. As far as the aircraft's flight model goes, for me that was one of the really pleasant surprises with the Razorback. Again, Aeroplane Heaven have been a little bit hit and miss with their flight models in the sim to date. Ground handling is certainly vastly improved with the P-47, the aircraft is very controllable during the takeoff. Without looking at the books, aircraft performance in terms of power settings, rate of climb, speeds, all seems to be very plausible. And generally speaking, the aircraft handled pretty nicely, was easy enough to control, no major vices. Nevertheless, the P-47 does still feel like a hulking beast. This 8-ton aircraft still felt like it had some character in the flight model. One issue with the flight model that we've already discussed, the aircraft is rather left-wing heavy, very difficult to correct that as well without the aileron trim seeming to work. But again, that's really my only major gripe with the flight model from what I've seen of the aircraft thus far. Systems-wise, the aircraft is generally where I was expecting for an Aeroplane Heaven product. Certainly, this is a far from study-level rendition of the P-47, and there are quite a few systems discrepancies, inaccuracies, and also just outright bugs. For example, when the aircraft loads in, the guns are already firing, which is a bit of a strange choice, and I imagine something that will be corrected. We've already spoken about the aileron trim, the vertical speed indicator, the ability to actuate the oar-cooler and intercooler flaps without any electrical power. Whilst it is possible that some of those things could be quirks of the real-world aircraft, I rather suspect not. Issues like the flap handle animation and the supercharger logic though, I'm quite happy to put down to sim limitations. As with most Aeroplane Heaven products though, it would have been nice to see just that little bit more polish ahead of release, especially with the P-47, which I think is generally a very solid add-on. Those sorts of things being fixed up really would have elevated the experience with the aircraft overall. Sounds we've touched on quite a bit throughout the video, overall again, rather hit and miss. I will say that I quite like the engine sounds overall. I know that will probably be something that divides opinion. But certainly in the low range, that R2800 has a nice gurgle to it. And at high power settings as well, it does feel like a powerful engine. Generally speaking, both internally, particularly externally, the engine sounds are quite nice. Again, they are perhaps just a little bit flat at certain ranges, and there is a little bit of flanging very occasionally as well from the sounds. Once more, I suspect not everybody will agree with this, but personally I think the engine sounds are actually a net positive to the package, and certainly a significant improvement from what we've seen with the likes of the P-51D. We've already spoken about it during the video, but there are certain areas of the soundscape with the aircraft that are lacking, and that is a real shame. With Warbirds, perhaps more than any other aircraft, the sound package is such an integral part of the experience. And as I say, I've gotten to the point now with the sim where really any switch sound, any control sound, any animation sounds that are missing, I find pretty unacceptable, particularly at this sort of price point. For me, it just totally kills the immersion when you actuate something without any associated sound. So I would implore Aeroplane Heaven to finish up the Razorback sound pack. I think that would go a huge way to making the product all that more appealing, and again making the P-47 a very solid, very enjoyable aircraft within the sim. As far as extras go, lots of nice features included with the product. Those features are wrapped up very nicely in a somewhat period appropriate, certainly aesthetically pleasing onboard tablet. Some of the functionalities that we didn't get a chance to touch on here today. Firstly, we have a very nice custom pilot. He can also be switched out for a default Asobo pilot, so plenty of options there. We also have various gun sight options for the aircraft. We can fit the NB3 or Mark 8 gun sights, as well as removing the gun sight altogether and installing a GPS. In terms of armament, we have 3 pylons on the P-47. The 2 wing pylons can also be removed. On those pylons we can load up various combinations of drop tanks or bombs. Lastly, in terms of weapons, as you'll have seen during the video, we also have some modelled 50 cals. As before, not the best animation that I've seen within the sim for such effects, but still very nice that they are included. Not every warbird within the sim has such functionality. Further to that, we can also remove the engine cowl. As you can see, a beautiful model of the R2800 included here as well. And the package also includes a whole host of real-world liveries, both in the olive drab green, as well as the polished aluminium. So once again, as is typical for Aeroplane Heaven, a very nice set of additional features included with the aircraft. Lots of little touches that really go to make the aircraft feel that much more authentic, and again, just elevate the experience for the user. In terms of documentation, the included manual is fairly decent. You get a 45-page booklet. That provides you with most of the details that you need to operate the product as well as fly the aircraft. It also gives you a little bit of history regarding the P-47, as well as a few details regarding sim limitations. So not the most comprehensive manual that I've come across, but certainly a very polished one. And nice to see included as well. Hats off to Aeroplane Heaven. There's quite a few developers these days not including a manual with their product. Lastly, so far as the product's FPS goes, the P-47 for me seems to be a very frame rate friendly aircraft. I was getting around 49 FPS with the P-47 versus around 52 with the default Cessna 152. In summary then, the P-47D Razorback I would say is Aeroplane Heaven's most accomplished work in the sim to date. I didn't have any major issues with the product, and again just pointing out the issues and presumed errors as I find them. I really only highlight those errors as I want the P-47D, and indeed all of the iconic aircraft that Aeroplane Heaven tend to recreate, to be the very best that they can be. These aircraft don't necessarily need to be study level to be enjoyable, but they do need to have all of those scrappy bugs fixed up, and again, a really polished and immersive sound set just brings these sorts of aircraft alive. Niggling issues aside though, once again I really enjoyed my time out with the aircraft. Unlike the P-51, which never really got into a flyable state, I'll certainly be spending some more time with the P-47. And in fact, just to give you some measure of my enjoyment with the aircraft, I'll probably give it another go after I've finished recording this video. Anyway, ladies and gents, I do hope you found the video useful. If you did, once again please consider giving it a like. If you'd like to see more content from the channel, then please do consider subscribing as well. And if you'd like to help support the channel further, you can do so by becoming a channel member or patron. As always, a very big thank you to my channel members and patrons for all of your support. It is very much appreciated. And to all of you, I do hope you're having a great day wherever you are. Take really good care, and I will see you all again soon.